Ciao and welcome. Today I'm going to be cooking two recipes using lentils. The first recipe is going to be a lentil soup using lentils which I have sprouted myself over the last 2.5 days. Here they are. You can see that some of them are quite interesting as the actual shoot is over a centimeter long. The second recipe will be using lentils which I have soaked overnight. Here they are, and they've been in water for 12 hours. Before I start, let me tell you how I've actually achieved this, and I'll tell you why later. So I've soaked this overnight firstly for 12 hours. Then I've got a tray over here and a damp cloth. I have laid them on top of a damp cloth and then another damp cloth on top, just like this. And I left them on my worktop for a day. Day 2, or beginning of day 2, which was yesterday, you can see from my footage what they looked like. There is a tiny little shoot, and I have repeated the same exercise. I washed them first, then I've made sure that my cloth at the bottom was still damp. I laid them on top, and the damp cloth goes on top, and I left them for another day. And we are here now this morning, ready to be cooked. Whereas these ones, obviously, they just have been in water for 12 hours. So I'm going to rinse them all once again, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to be cooking them. But also I'll talk to you a little bit about the benefits of lentils in general, but also why these lentils are going to be even better than normal lentils. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Now here's a little fun fact about the origin of the word lentil. They are little legumes in the shape of a lens. You can see why. And the irony is that lens is how you say lentils in Latin. So that is quite interesting that that word has been adapted. I'm actually showing you here 3 different piles. One is the pile of the lentils when they were dry. One is the lentils which have been soaked overnight. And I'm putting them on this dish so that hopefully you can see better. So is dry lentil. Here is a 12 hours soaked overnight lentil. You can see it's more or less doubled in size. And here is a lentil which has been sprouted after a couple of days. So this is 2 days older than this one in terms of treatment. Some people have asked me, why do you soak your lentils? In my case, actually, the instructions of the packaging suggest to soak them. But I am aware that there are lentils on the market that you can just cook without soaking. My advice would be to always soak them, even if you do not soak them for 12 hours, because you're going to make the lentils considerably tender, and they cook quicker, and I think the texture when you eat them is a little bit better. So even if you have lentils that do not need soaking, if you just leave them in water for 2 or 3 hours before you cook them, trust me, the experience afterwards is considerably better. Also, some of you have asked me, can we use tinned lentils rather than soaking them overnight? And the answer is, of course, yes, you can. And the nutritional value of tinned lentils is not different to normal lentils that you cook yourself or you soak yourself. The only difference and what you need to be aware of is sodium, the amount of salt. And tinned legumes, not just lentils, they tend to have a lot of salt in them. So you could actually rinse them under the tap before you cook with them. And that would remove at the very least 50% of the salt. The only downside of that is that you would also be removing the brine, and that holds a lot of nutrients. So if you were to use those lentils, I would suggest that you do not add any salt to your food, because there is plenty of salt in the lentils, and then you can add salt at the end. On the other hand, you can also buy lentils in tins which have got 0 salt, in which case you got the best of both worlds. But the only other thing I would add is that when you buy tinned legumes, not just lentils, even beans and chickpeas and so on, the texture tend to be considerably softer than the ones you soaked at home. So it is a balance. A lot is to do with speed, a lot is also to do with your preferences. But I cook with both, but generally I always try to use my own lentils that I soak overnight, because I think the texture is better after you cook them. So that's a little tip for you. Lentil became very popular in the early 80s when at a practical level people realized that they felt considerably fuller for a longer time after eating lentils. So when you're eating lentils, you're not just feeding the moment, you are also protecting your guts. They are rich in fiber, in protein, and very, very rich in antioxidant. And they've often been referred as the sort of fruit that has a second meal effect. And that is because they are rich in fiber and they stabilize any high sugar intake that you might have in a second meal. So for example, if you have sugar or carbohydrates, the lentils will help stabilize that spike. And of course, antioxidants are very good because they prevent inflammations of your body. I've just added a generous amount of olive oil and a couple of onions roughly chopped, and then you see me adding my lentils, the ones I've soaked overnight. So I'm making the lentil with olive oil and onions first. As they've actually been in there for about a minute, I'm going to add a tiny little amount of water first so that help them to get going, and I'll turn the temperature up. I mentioned herbs at the beginning. You saw me adding a bay leaf, and my second herb, which goes really well with the lentils, is going to be rosemary. But I'm going to actually remove the rosemary from the little trunk so that I don't need to worry later, and I'll mix it together. To give you an idea, when they were dry, they were a couple of 100 grams, so they would have doubled in weight at the very least. So 400 grams if you're using tinned lentils. I've just added 1 teaspoon of salt and some pepper. And as all the water has been absorbed, I'm now topping it up with more cold water. And I've added about an inch of water above the top of my lentils. And I'm now going to bring everything to the boil. And here they are, they're beginning to boil quite vigorously, so I'll move them here to this side of my hob where the temperature is considerably lower, just below medium, and I'll leave them to gently simmer for about 30 minutes without the lid on, or until they are fully cooked. So in the meantime, I'll start on the second recipe. Now here's an interesting thing about sprouting lentils, as they will increase the level of antioxidant. In the case of lentils, actually they double. If you were to do the same with chickpeas, actually the increase of antioxidant is as much as 5-fold. Incredible. I'm actually planning to do the same with chickpeas, so there will be a video coming at some point. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 large cloves of garlic and a little one, so quite generous with garlic, whole inside my pot with some olive oil at the bottom. When they are dry in our cupboards, lentils are asleep, but the moment we introduce water and oxygen, we wake them up. They come back to life and they germinate, as you've seen from the shoots. What that means though is that they are very young, very tender and fragile. So naturally the lentil will look to defend itself, and it will be switching on some enzymes that protect them, and those enzymes are going to be a compound that we refer to as antioxidants. They've already got antioxidants in them when they're dry, but obviously now there is an increase in antioxidants to protect them, and that is why they become even more healthy for you, because obviously they got more antioxidants. So we are not adding antioxidants, they're just producing themselves because they start living. I've added the tomatoes to my garlic and olive oil, and I'm keeping the temperature on medium. Do not have it too high, otherwise you will end up burning the garlic. And also a secret for this recipe is to keep the temperature medium to low. This will take about 4 or 5 minutes, and you can see that the tomatoes are already beginning to release a lot of juice. You can also of course use tinned tomatoes if you do not have access to fresh tomatoes. 300 grams of fresh tomatoes is what I've used. So I'll leave this for about 3-4 minutes, as I said, and then I'll come back to it. And I'm now ready to add my sprouted lentils. So in they go all at once. And I'm mixing everything together initially, and I'm not going to add any water. I'm leaving them as they are for about 4 minutes, as I want the lentils to absorb the lovely flavor from the garlic and from the tomatoes. Also, reference garlic, here it is. I'm going to leave mine in because I like it, and I think that as you cook it, you will still be releasing a lot of flavor. But if you want to, you can remove it at this point. I've done a lot of the work already. So I'll leave it for 3 minutes, and then I'll add some water. To make this dish, I use 300 grams of dry lentils, by the way, so you got an idea of quantities. Just like I did before, I'm now adding a bay leaf and also some rosemary. They are my favorite herbs with these dishes. Also, I use them if I cook beans or even chickpeas, but you can not add them in if you don't want them, or you can add different type of herbs, but these are really good. So I'll mix them in and I can start adding my water now. So this is cold water, and I'll start I'll turn the temperature up so that it's heating up, and I will go all the way and cover the surface of my lentils. So at the moment you can see that I am level with the lentils, and just like I did with the first recipe, I'm going to now top it up approximately 1 inch above the top of my lentils, and I'll turn the temperature up and I'll wait until it starts boiling. And I'm going to salt them next. So a couple of these, equivalent of 1 teaspoon of salt. As I often say, I can always add salt later, and some pepper. And if you take a look, they're beginning to boil. So just like I did with the first batch, I'll turn the temperature down on medium, but this time, unlike the first batch, I'm going to place my lid on, and I'll leave them to cook for about 25 minutes. Decision time, although I did make up my mind when I started this recipe. This is when you need to decide if you're making a soup or if you're making pasta. I'm making a soup, so I'm now chopping in little cubes 500 grams of potatoes. I'm making a large batch, and I will be consuming this over the next 2 to 3 days, mostly for lunch. So I'm using potatoes as I prefer to reheat potatoes. But if I was to make it with pasta, I would have used 300 grams of pasta, whereas I'm actually using 500 grams of potatoes. That is because pasta is dry and it will be absorbing more water, whereas potatoes, obviously, they will not absorb as much. You can also be a little bit more strategic about it. So if you wanted to, in 25 minutes, you can split the batch into 2, and for the purpose of maybe of tonight's dinner, you just add some pasta, and then you leave the rest, and then you got options for another day. You can add potatoes later, or you can just eat as it is, of course. Anyway, I'll see you in 25 minutes once this is ready. We're nearly there. So the next step is to either cook your potatoes or your pasta. I would advise though to taste them first to ensure that they are pretty much there or thereabout. Ooh, they're there. Lovely. So if you were to cook potatoes like me, and you chop them in about 1.5 cubes like I have, they will cook in about 15 minutes, or maybe just under 20 minutes. I'm going to turn the temperature up depending on how big you've chopped them. If you were to cook pasta, I would still keep the temperature very low, just below medium, and cook the pasta in the stock, of course. Do not cook it separately. And I would cook something short, like shells called conchiglie in Italian, or you can go for macaroni or ditalini. Something small is always better with these dishes. And generally pasta is cooked al dente in about 8 minutes. But as I will be cooking this long and slow, it will require about 12 minutes. So that is the trick, remember, long and slow. And I'm going to wait until this reaches the boil once again, like this now, and I'll turn it down again, once again on medium, and I will leave them to cook without the lid on this time, and the same applies if you're doing pasta. And I'll take them to the end, and then we can taste them. I'm going to share a little personal story with you. A few years ago, during COVID, I developed a blood clot on my left calf. I don't know why, because I keep very active and I exercise, and my diet has never been too bad. But the outcome of that was that the doctor prescribed me some anticoagulant tablets, and by definition his advice was that I should not be taking any anti-inflammatory tablets. They don't go very well clearly with the anticoagulants. And ironically, that forced me to to change my diet, where I now supplement the level of antioxidant that I receive from food by cooking more legumes, and by making my diet considerably rich with things like my breakfast here. It is, I have, for example, lots of these are muesli for breakfast, and we complement them with blueberries because again they're very rich in antioxidants and also some nuts, almond and seed, omega-3. So there are lots of things that I now do to offset the level of anti-inflammatory that a tablet could provide me, and that is much better, of course. And according to some studies, we should actually consume legumes not just on a daily basis, but with every meal. Now, clearly you do not want to have lentils for breakfast, but if you were to switch to something which has got a high degree of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents, then you can achieve that. We do not eat legumes every day, but I now incorporate them in my diet and I eat them about 3 to 4 times a week, which I think is okay. It's better than not eating any at all, of course. You see me serving the first portion of the simple lentils with my onion and olive oil. I'm not doing my second one with the sprouted lentils, and here they go. And in both cases I'm adding a little olive oil at the very top, as I always do. By the way, I meant to add, if you find that your water level goes down as you're cooking your potatoes, just top it up with a little hot water. That'll be perfectly okay. I'll try the simple lentils first, and then I will let you know what the verdict is. They're cooked to perfection, and you get an equal balance between the onion, the olive oil and the lentils. All 3 ingredients are clearly the heroes here. And I sometimes just cook lentils in water with a bay leaf, no salt, then I leave them to cool down, and I drain them and I keep them in the fridge. And even if I cook some pasta sometimes, I just sprinkle them on top for the very reason. Let's move here and see what this is like. Let's get a good amount of lentils and a potato and see what it's like. Here, the acidity of the tomato increases the flavor, but also the hardness of the potatoes clearly is present, and the lentils are there in the background, and it is honestly delicious. And of course the rosemary and the bay leaf will have their supporting part. And in terms of the lentils, in terms of flavor, it's not that dissimilar if you were to cook them without sprouting them. Clearly the benefit of sprouting is the fact that they are considerably healthier and that they've got a lot more nutrients. So I hope that you have found these 2 recipes easy to follow and make. I'm sure you have, but also the science behind those recipes and the nutritional value of lentils and any legumes come to that is incredible. So hopefully you make them. Thank you for watching. See you later. Ciao, ciao.